Good morning, everybody. Well, guess what I want to do today? I want to show you what my compost looks like after sitting for a full summer. That means from June until November without water. Yep, that's what it looks like. Doesn't look like it's broken down very much, does it? Well, that is because it absolutely has not broken down at all. Let me empty out some of this and we'll see how much compost we got over the summer. Again, I want to emphasize this is without water. I moved some of this away, and aside from a musty odor, it's the same all the way down to the bottom. So I think it's fair to say that none of this, absolutely none of this, has broken down over the summer. Yep, maybe here, you see, do you see where it started breaking down the darker pieces? Hold on here, let me put this down and I'll show you. Do you see how that started? Do you see it's dark? It started to turn to soil just a little bit, but not really. Now, I generally don't turn my compost. What I normally do with my compost is stick it in the bins, water it once a week, and then when I need compost, I take from underneath. In other words, I just remove the top and I take what is broken down from underneath, because that is what the worms have gotten to, and they've been able to break it down. So I know a lot of you are going, that's not compost, that's just a mulch pile. Yes, it is. It is just a mulch pile. The reason that it hasn't broken down is because I haven't given it any water. If I was to give this water, it would have broken down. But this summer, I did not give it any water. And the reason is because I was not out here watering every week. So it didn't get enough moisture in order to feed the microbes and to feed the little critters that would break this down. So it is as if I put the grasses in there a couple of weeks ago. Let's come over here to the next one, to that box over there. Let's see if that one is any different. Put this up against the tree. I'm going to open the lid. Look at that. This one doesn't look like it broke down much, but it has reduced in volume. This was cram stuffed. And let me see if I can move some of this away and show you what it looks like down here. Now, I moved a couple of layers aside, and you see, I see some activity there, but there are still multiple layers to go through before I reach the bottom of the bin here. So just like the other one, it is broken down just a tad bit, and that is probably because the container condensates every evening. Again, I did not water this one at all, just like the other one. And I think the reason why you see a reduction in the volume is because this was mostly leaves, while the other one was mostly tall grasses and things like that. All right, now this is a third composting bin that I have in my garden. How do you like all these twigs and stuff from the elderberry tree that I pruned? And take a look at this. I'm going to tell you this is pretty much the same thing. The difference is that this has some of the branches from the rosemary bush that I had trimmed back. And then every now and then I'll put a few vegetables and stuff in here. Now this is all dry. It's all dry. And as you can see, there's nothing really breaking down in there. Again, I haven't watered this. Now I'm waiting for the winter. When the winter comes, I'll leave the lids off and it will water the compost, and then it will break down over the winter. What? What do you mean break down over the winter? Yes, it will, because with the moisture, the microbes come alive and then they start breaking it down. The cold here where I live, it gets really, really cold, but then we also have sunny days. So I take the lids up when it rains, and then everything is dark, so on the sunny days it heats up. How does compost work? You throw green material into a pile and it breaks down. It's very easy, but we don't really have to do much. There are different ways to make compost. Some people turn it every couple of days, every week, or whatever predetermined time. And others just let it sit and it will eventually break down by itself. You have cold composting, hot composting. Cold composting is where you let it sit and you don't worry about the heat, the temperature for it to break down. It takes a long time for it to break down. And then you've got the hot composting where you try to bring the temperature up for the material to break down a lot sooner. I don't worry about either one. Sometimes the compost gets hot, sometimes the compost stays cold. Either way, it breaks down by itself. I don't worry about turning it over. And the reason is because where I live in the summertime, it's hot. It doesn't really rain, but it's hot. And my containers are dark containers. So as long as I water the compost once a week, it will break down rather quickly from the bottom up. So if I've got the container here, the what's on the very bottom will start breaking down before what's in the middle or the top. And I can go into my compost every few weeks and collect what's on the bottom, and then it will just gradually, the whole thing will just gradually deplete until there's no more compost left. Although that's never happened to me because I'm constantly adding to it. At least this is the way it was in the past, not this summer. You see, since I have become my official permaculture journey, I don't really have that many weeds, and I don't have that much to clean up and put into a compost pile. Yes, it helps that I have rabbits, it helps that I have chickens, but in my back garden, the chickens and the rabbits aren't running free. I will collect the material and put it into their enclosures. But for the most part, there's not that much that grows up. And the reason there isn't that much that grows up is because I'm not watering my entire garden all the time. It's not getting water every day. So I don't really have that much to put into a compost pile. But as you can see, in the springtime, I filled up my compost piles and they didn't decompose. And the reason is because I didn't add water. The microorganisms had nothing to drink. There's no water. As soon as I begin to water, then everything will start to break down nicely. And in a few weeks, I will have very, very nice compost. Now, the entire thing won't break down all at once. It takes time for these things to break down. But that's okay, because as I add more material, right, this is the compost, as I add more material to the top and whatever breaks down at the bottom, things will gradually lower, and then I'll put more things on top and gradually it'll go down, and more things on top and goes down. And this gives me a continuous supply of compost. Now, you don't need a lot of compost to put into your vegetables. You only need a tiny little bit. You don't need a lot of compost. If it's good quality compost, you don't need a lot of it. Now, over the past few years, I have really neglected my compost. Don't have a need for it. Once your land has built up fertility, you'll see that your need for adding things is reduced because your land is naturally built up and your soil gets better and better. It's not the compost that improves the soil, but it's the things that you plant. It's how you treat the soil, you know, once things are planted there. So I chop and drop. You know, I pick my vegetables. I'll put the leftovers and the remains back into the container. You know, I'll bury it inside the container or something. You know, like lay it on top or lightly cover it with the top of the soil. So I'm constantly rebuilding so that the compost is built into my container beds. And of course, around my trees. Around my trees, there are huge compost piles around my trees. I'll show you in just a minute. I do not rake up the leaves. And if I trim weeds and they're not going to the rabbit, they get laid down under the tree. And then over here, you see all the leaves fell. I don't rake any of this up. I just don't. I leave it there. And then it composts over the winter and the following summer. And then if I come over here, you'll see, now this may not look the prettiest, but when I cleaned out the pond, you see when these die, I just put them over here around the trees. And then as you can see, leaves and things that were collected from the trees in the front where the leaves fell on the road, I just raked them up and put them here. And as you can see that on the road, they started composting there on the road, so that's extra humus and debris there. So as you can see around my trees, I have things composting all the time. So I don't need to add compost to the trees. There's a consistent soil building activity going on there. Regarding my vegetable gardens, you know, sometimes if I need a little top up of the soil, I'll just like remove the leaves aside away from the trees, and I will just scoop up a top layer there, get a couple of handfuls, maybe like half a bucket, and then I'll add that to my vegetable bins. So a compost pile is really good if you need large quantities of soil, if you need to produce soil, if you need to produce compost in large quantities, or you have nothing else to do with your leftover weeds, or if you want to maintain this extremely manicured, tidy look, you know, you can rake up your leaves and then you can compost them, your grass clippings, you can compost those. So the compost piles are good for things like that. I'm actually considering giving up a compost pile. I don't have very much vegetable waste. As you can see in the one pile that did have some waste, it was a few, you know, citrus peels and eggshells. That's it, really. Everything else is just sitting there. And I went this entire summer without needing extra soil. So that tells me maybe it's my time to give up making actual compost in the bins. I don't know, I'm still thinking about that. But in the meantime, if you want your compost piles to work, you must water them. You must. And it's your choice if you want to turn them or not. There are compost experts out there on the web, and they give you pretty good advice. But I just know that in nature doesn't turn the piles of weeds. You know, if you've got grass clippings on a field, they're not getting turned over. They're just sitting there until they disappear into nice humus. If you've got leaves on a sidewalk or at the stairs and they just sit there in a pile. You don't have something coming and turning them over. They will turn to soil on their own. Why? Because the little microorganisms, you know, the little guys that actually make the compost, those guys are hard at work under the surface. You can't see them, but as long as they are covered, they're going to be doing their job, whether you turn the compost or not. And in fact, by turning the compost, you might be disturbing some of them. I don't know. I'm not a so-called expert on compost, but I do know one thing. You need water, and the actual good composted soil is at the lower level, the absolute lowest level. And that's where the humus is. That's where the really good parts of the soil are. And so I always take from the very bottom and then cover it back up with whatever needs to continue decomposing. Anyway, that's my take on compost. Until next time.